Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we will recap the SALT conference in Wyoming, where they talked about all things crypto, whether the U.S. should be taking stakes in companies, some interesting creative policy choices coming out of the Trump administration. We'll update you on the latest Cracker Barrel drama, President Trump tweeting an end to the drama, I suppose. A new $100 million super PAC supporting AI, and much more to discuss. Some new shows coming out. Football season is upon us, so we'll get into it. Remember to follow me on X at MorgansternNJ. Like, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your pods. You can watch us on Rumble, YouTube, listen to us on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, Zach, where should we start?
Well, we're going to start in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. A few places that are nicer to be this time of year. But last week, the blockchain world descended there on Jackson Hole for the SALT Conference's Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. There was a lot of love and optimism. The Fed Vice Chair Michelle Bowman said the U.S. is at the beginning of what appears to be a seismic shift in the way we think about money, value, and the fabric of our financial system. I think she's onto something. But Brian, can you tell us more about this event and what were your takeaways from it?
Sure. So it's a conference, one of the few conferences I actually didn't go to myself. I feel like I'm at a different conference every week. I was not at this one, but there were a lot of luminaries there, which is why we wanted to talk about it. So SALT is kind of famously a big conference run by the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, and it always has a star-studded lineup. This year we had Senator Tim Scott, we had Senator Lummis, we had the new chairman of the SEC, Paul Atkins, we had two Fed governors, Eric Trump. That it was sponsored by Kraken, which of course is one of the biggest crypto exchanges out there. There was representation from Solana, Hut 8, A16Z. There was a lot. There was a lot coming out of there. I think the Fed comments were particularly interesting to me because, as you mentioned, Vice Chair for Supervision, Michelle Bowman, really expressing optimism, talking about how the U.S. needs to be a home for innovation. Good to see a regulator not protecting incumbents or being afraid of new things. Fed Governor Waller was there. It said just explicitly, like, there's nothing to be afraid of. This is a stark contrast from the Fed of old. In 2023, they issued a statement saying that digital assets pose threats to the stability of the financial system, which of course helped precipitate Operation Choke Point 2.0, where they were just trying to shut down digital asset businesses. Now you have Fed governors showing up talking about the promise that some of this technology is offering. This comes on the heels of what we discussed last time about SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce talking about how disintermediating our economy can be a good thing and empowering and can be pro-freedom. So this is further evidence that we're really seeing progress here. I thought it was funny that Senator Scott was thanking the crowd for getting rid of Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio who had been chairman of the banking committee, who was, I think, a charitable way of putting it, he was unhelpful to the digital asset industry, entirely unhelpful. There are stories of him snubbing people. There were constituent companies and stuff that would try to talk to him. He would just no-show for the meetings. I mean, he wouldn't hold a hearing. He wouldn't advance any legislation. He was very unhelpful. Of course, he's now running again, trying to reclaim a seat in the Senate. We'll see how that works out. The state of Ohio has really shifted pretty hard red. It used to be the quintessential swing state in elections of old, but in the last few, it's just gotten redder and redder. So it'll be a tough slog for Senator Brown there. But I thought that was a funny comment. I think one thing, we talked about was Wyoming releasing its stable coin. So interesting to see a sovereign introducing a stable coin. I don't know what the market appetite for that will be. It is not available yet to consumers, but Wyoming really just trying to send a signal that they're competing to be kind of, if the U.S. is the crypto capital of the world, or it's going to be, Wyoming wants to be the crypto capital state in the union. They have stiff competition. Of course, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has bragged about, Texas being the home for crypto and innovation, the home for Bitcoin mining. It is the biggest state in that regard. Florida, Governor DeSantis has, I think, really been trying to compete for these businesses as well. So there's a number of states that are getting into the act at this point. SEC Chair Paul Atkins, after his speech, said it's a new day at the SEC. I mean, that's true. We're seeing a lot of IPOs. We're seeing enforcement cases dropped, no more regulation by enforcement. But he apparently told somebody he wants to make IPOs great again, which I think is cute. He's obviously a Trump appointee, and he really does, I think we want to see more market action. It has been fertile ground. We saw Circle's IPO. We've seen CoreWeave's. We've seen a number of others that have been quite successful. I think the market's ready for more activity, and the SEC chair seems ready to cheer it on. Probably too many other speakers to mention here. The main takeaway for our listeners probably is the difference in how people were talking about the digital asset industry in general. Like in the last administration, it was like, how do we survive? And how do we convince policymakers that this kind of innovation is good for America? Because the government was just hostile. I mean, there's no other word to describe it. They were just hostile to the industry. So it was sort of a confab on like, how do we weather this storm? This time it was, as you said, just straight optimism, and everybody very excited about the future. So good to see that gathering of luminaries, everybody having a smile on their face instead of stress lines on their forehead. I think it was interesting to see all of those great takeaways, particularly the Fed governors saying nice things about the digital asset industry. That's great.
Yeah, great event. Also, we put a picture up earlier, but Senator Scott was pretty fashionable with he had like a bright salmon colored blazer or something like that and some striped socks. So he was letting loose too.
I think his wife is helping him with his wardrobe. She's doing a good job.
It is. My thoughts exactly. A woman who knows how to help a man dress. For me, I dressed the same way that I did since like late high school and early college. And when I got married, my wife helped me to, dress a little bit more age appropriately. So good on Senator Scott's wife for helping him with his wardrobe. For our next segment, interesting, some would say controversial, but it's an interesting story that's been developing over the last few months and weeks, really. So in February, the president issued an executive order to establish a sovereign wealth fund in the United States. And then a few weeks ago, NVIDIA and AMD struck a interesting 15% revenue sharing deal with the U.S. to sell AI chips to China. And then this week, the president has said he's going to take a 10% stake in Intel. There's a lot going on here, Brian, and the analysis, it has several parts to it. There's the sort of mechanical and operational side versus the philosophical and political side. So if we could take each of those in turn. First of all, can you walk us through these last few weeks in the news about the government's conversations and the sort of deals that it's making with companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and others?
Yeah, so the data points that we have here. So export controls administered by the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry Security, they are meant to keep, they call dual use technology. It can be used for economic activity, normal product manufacturing, or it could be used for military or intelligence or things that our adversaries could use against us. So certain things fall into this category. Semiconductors, chips do fall into this category. Now, the chip companies that you mentioned, NVIDIA and AMD, there is a lot of market demand in China for chips. So an export license, the ability to export an American company into China, quite valuable, can be quite tricky because of the issues that I just discussed. So they've reached this sort of place where the administration will allow them to sell chips into China, but they can't sell the latest models. So ensuring that China is still kind of behind the US in the quality of the chips that they're allowed to have access to. So we'll always hopefully stay ahead while kind of satisfying their demand to build things and buy things from American companies. And the way I view this is the president sees some risk in selling chips into China, also sees a lot of economic opportunity, wants the American people and our government to be compensated for that risk. And so he has said, okay, you can sell chips to China, but they can't be the most advanced. And the US is going to take 15% of the revenue for this so that we can fund our government, do whatever it is. We can be compensated. We, the American people, can be compensated for the risk we're taking on you, these highly profitable companies, of course. So it seems to be, I think, the thought process there. That's one data point. We, of course, a couple of months ago saw what happened with U.S. Steel. It was going to be sold to a Japanese company, Nippon Steel. The Biden administration, Trump administration, both kind of seeing the steel industry or industry, if we're going to use Trumpian speak, they view the steel industry as highly strategically important. Also, a critical source of blue-collar U.S. jobs. So there was some consternation on selling a quintessential American company. It's called U.S. Steel to a foreign company. I think the company and their workers generally were okay with the transaction because it was going to help the company succeed. They're going to get, my understanding is, capital injection, kind of stronger ownership, probably add some longevity and heft to the company. So they weren't necessarily opposed to the transaction. Due to the strategic nature of U.S. Steel, the president would only approve of the transaction if the U.S. government receives what he calls a golden share and some authority over the governance of the company, because the steel industry is so strategically important. Steel is in so many things that we need, the government needs. So I think he may have taken a page, and this will be, I think, a recurring theme in these discussions. The president likes to find good ideas all around the world and then posit them in the United States. So the golden share model I have seen with TikTok. I think the Chinese government has a golden share with TikTok and ByteDance. You have TikTok US, of course, like 170 million Americans, some eye-popping number are using TikTok. Chinese government maintains a golden share in terms of voting rights and governance there. I think President Trump said, maybe we should have a golden share in a critical business like U.S. Steel. So that was his deal. He would approve the transaction going through if the U.S. government gets a golden share. Reason why there's an approval for this type of transaction is because the U.S. has something called CFIUS. It's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It deals with national security risks when foreign entities are investing in U.S. companies. Various criteria, certain types of deals, real estate near military installations could be subject to CFIUS review. Acquiring a stake it doesn't have to be a majority stake, but a stake that's big enough in a critical industry like the steel industry. They're going to look at who is the investor. Do we trust them? What exactly kind of governance rights are they going to have? What kind of access to information, sensitive IP, things like that. So there's this process to mitigate national security risks when we're talking about foreign investment into the U.S. We generally want to encourage foreign direct investment, but there are certain areas of the economy that can be sensitive for national security reasons. And so that's why CFIUS exists. That's why the president can have a veto over certain transactions. And that's how this kind of negotiation took place. That was the legal basis. That's my understanding anyway. That's another data point. So we talked about the chips. We talked about U.S. Steel. We now have another chip company, Intel, under the CHIPS Act, which passed during the Biden administration. It was like a $250 billion bill. Really should have been a $50 billion bill. Became a Christmas tree. Tons of ornaments hung on it. It ballooned to like $250 billion at a time when we were already spending too much money. So I think the president looked at that. Intel was getting, I think it was 10 or $11 billion, something like that, under CHIPS Act funding. And I think President Trump said, well, if the taxpayers are giving you all this money, what are they getting for it? So he said, I think we should get a stake in the company for it. So that seems to be what's happening. So the U.S. government is going to get a 10% stake in Intel. And My understanding is no governance rights or anything like that, but the taxpayers would get paid back and hopefully share in the profits, assuming Intel does well. Quote here on the overall, like, what do these data points add up to? Quote here from Kevin Hassett, the National Economic Council Director, economic advisor to the president. He said that this is part of the administration's strategy that includes tariffs to encourage more companies to onshore their production. I'm not sure how directly applicable that is to these deals or not. The president himself said, I will make deals like that for our country all day long, adding that stupid people are upset with a move that he said will bring more money and jobs to the US. So this is a pattern of the US starting to take stakes in companies. Other governments do this. Lots of state-owned airlines, for example. Germany has a stake in Lufthansa. I believe Qatar owns, I think, their airline. The Emirates, I think, has a state-owned airline that are very high quality, very profitable. So it happens, not usually in America, but it has happened in America. Couple of recent examples. After the 2008 financial crisis, the US government took stakes in some of the biggest financial institutions. They generally ended up getting paid back and did not maintain their stakes. Another example, GM Motors, when it was failing under the Obama administration, taxpayers ended up getting a stake in the company, went through a reorganization. The taxpayers, I believe, got paid back and made profit on that and then exited. So if the government takes a stake in an industry for the purpose of stabilizing the economy, it's usually in a crisis situation, it's usually temporary. President's talking about perhaps a more permanent pattern. We will see. So I think those are kind of the recent data points that have people raising their eyebrows a little, saying what's happening here. And I tried my best to explain the thinking that I think is going on here in the Trump administration. So start there.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think it was helpful that you laid out the sort of, the histories and other examples of it. And another phrase that comes up in these kinds of conversations is a sovereign wealth fund. Can you talk through what that is? And is that a new concept, or does it follow that same pattern of adopting ideas from other places in the world where this has worked?
Sure. Well, there are sovereign wealth funds in many places. Is basically an investment fund or vehicle that's owned or controlled by a sovereign, by a government. Could be a nation, could be a state. There are a number of them. Norway has a very large one, $1.8 trillion. They use a lot of the profits from their investments. I think mostly ownership of energy, I believe. I think a lot of oil and gas. I'm not sure what else. But, I believe it's part of how they pay their pensioners, older folks, like think of their, Social Security. China, many Middle Eastern countries have sovereign wealth funds. The Saudis have one that supports their Vision 2030, which is part of MBS's vision to kind of help modernize Saudi society, diversify how they remain profitable from just oil. And they are investing in sports, tourism, tech, all sorts of different things to help future-proof the economy of Saudi Arabia. Hong Kong has an interesting one that they use primarily for economic and currency stability. So that may be a model that President Trump is looking at. I don't know if it is, but it may be, because he sees the $37 trillion national debt. He sees $1 trillion in spending just servicing our debt. He's seen the purchasing power of a dollar go down by like 25% just in the last few years alone, because the money supply has ballooned after coronavirus spending and a lot of the bills that the Biden administration passed, which were extremely costly. So our money supply has ballooned, which makes the purchasing power of each dollar that already exists go down. So if we need to kind of manage the national balance sheet, as it were, perhaps the Hong Kong example is one he's looking at. Another issue here is one of the largest expenditures in our government. We're talking about Social Security, Medicaid. If your healthcare and your pensioners, when you have an aging baby boomer population, when all of that is going on, we would be in a much better position if we had been investing the Social Security trust fund, the Social Security that's taken out of all of our paychecks. If that were not put in treasuries, which is just kind of hovering around what the dollar can do, sometimes losing ground to the dollar, if you have the value of the dollar going down and you're just invested in treasuries, you're basically putting the money in a melting ice cube. If those funds had been invested in just like the S&P or the NASDAQ, or, pick your collection of US industries, we probably would not have a Social Security crisis. Like, we would not be in a situation where Social Security is going to go bankrupt in the next 10 years. But that's where we find ourselves. So my guess is that he's looking at perhaps the Hong Kong situation where they use it to help stabilize their economy and their currency, because we've been having problems with that. He may be looking at Norway, where they're helping the pensioners with the sovereign wealth fund. Had we had something like that, we would be in a much better position today. So a couple of models that he may be considering when he says he wants to launch a sovereign wealth fund. Of course, when you have $37 trillion in debt, some folks think leverage investing might be a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow. It might also be kind of visionary in terms of helping strengthen the health of the U.S. government and balance sheet. Maybe his thinking. A couple other examples are state level funds. You have the Alaska Permanent Fund paying a dividend to Alaskans from oil revenue. A lot of people don't know this. You get paid to live in Alaska. They only have it's a country the size of like Western Europe. It is the largest state geographically in the United States by far, but it's only got about 700,000 residents in the entire state, most of which, about 500,000 of which, live in the very populous small areas of Fairbanks and Anchorage. But so the Alaska Permanent Fund pays people to live in Alaska. The Texas Permanent University Fund has 2.1 million acres of land that's leased to oil and gas companies, generates revenue to fund the UT, University of Texas, and Texas A&M University systems. I like this note you gave me that UT, as the largest public university endowment, often battling with Harvard for the top spot. Some nice Texas pride there. I appreciate it.
Yes.
So sovereign wealth funds are a thing. They've been a thing for a long time. And perhaps this is one of those other instances. The president seeing something that other countries are doing, saying, that seems like a pretty good idea. Maybe we should do that. And there's a couple of pretty good reasons. Like I said, we have a debt problem. We have a Social Security bankruptcy problem. Hong Kong is using a sovereign wealth fund to deal with their debt, stabilize their currency. Norway is using it to help with their pensioners. Perhaps we could use it for both. So I think innovative idea, and we'll see how it plays out. I think arguably you have to get the debt kind of under control, just start paying it down first, and then build up a sovereign wealth fund. He's kind of doing building up sovereign wealth fund first because of these specific opportunities that he saw with U.S. Steel, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel. So maybe he's just laying the groundwork, building the foundation, so that we can then have a sovereign wealth fund to deal with our debt, currency stabilization, and Social Security pensioner problem. That's the way I think about it anyway.
This is very helpful, and very helpful discussion. And I hope for the viewer, it helps you see that some of these ideas, they may sound a little bit out there because they are. It's different than how business has been run and done by the government for so long. It's been tried. Some of these things have been tried elsewhere, and I think it goes to the willingness of and the vision of the president to consider all the means possible to make America wealthy again. We're making IPOs great again. We're making us healthy again. We're going to have hats that can no longer fit all the acronyms. The final prong, and it has been kind of a thread through the conversation, but the final prong of this is the philosophical or the political. And I guess my question is it little L liberal? sort of like in the sense of classical liberalism, for the United States government to set up these kinds of arrangements with private companies, or in some of the articles that we've read, even from prominent conservatives, are saying this is essentially taking us down the road to socialism. So what's your take on kind of the philosophical or the political side of this conversation?
So I look kind of first at the specific deals and the impacts and the stated policy goals. So if you want stronger industry in the US, more blue collar jobs, you want a blue collar boom, you want to be onshoring manufacturing, you want to make sure that the companies that provide those jobs, that create goods and services to export rather than import, would become a bit of an importer economy. If you want to shift it more in the direction of an exporter economy where we build things, I think when you look at the specific actions, may be aimed at that. The government, of course, provides conditions for these companies to succeed. The president thinks that the taxpayers should be able to share in the prosperity that is built in America. We've discussed these sorts of deals could be laying the groundwork for a sovereign wealth fund to help with the debt and currency stability and with our Social Security bankruptcy problem. So when you look at them individually, you can kind of see the rationale for them. When you look at them collectively, you then think, wait a minute, what is the proper role of government in general? And should the government have stakes in companies that are more than just for an emergency? Should they have any governance rights? Should they have, is a US invested company going to be treated more favorably in the marketplace so that, you're in a way picking winners and losers if one competitor has US backing and another doesn't? I look to the Mount Rushmore of supply side economists and people like Larry Kudlow. Not a fan of this. They don't like government intervention in general. Others, of course, are not a fan of this idea, mostly on the conservative side, for those reasons. They don't want a socialist country or a communist country where the means of production are seized, or we have a collectivist view. Generally, Americans want the rugged individualism, and they want the government to stay off their backs. Um, and so I'm sensitive to those arguments, and I'm kind of torn in each direction because I can see a policy rationale that's going to put the U.S. in a stronger position, put the taxpayer in a stronger position with each of the actions individually. I also understand the concern about the trend of the government becoming too involved in the private sector. So I kind of get pulled in both directions. I don't know. Do you have a view on all of this? What are your thoughts?
Big picture, I think it's hopefully for the viewer, it's helpful to just raise that these kinds of conversations are happening. I think that the president's strategy right now is so big, broad, and bold, and it doesn't seem to fit in the traditional, those sort of traditional political molds where there's, it's like the sort of, I mean, you look at the list of people that have, spoken out against this. They're politically safe. One, Jeff Flake is a former senator. Tom Tillis is retiring, and Rand Paul is just Rand Paul. So it's easy from the sort of, let's say, armchair side of things to say all the things that, my bookshelf of Austrian economists would say. But the president's vision here is big, it's bold, it's to do things differently. It has that sort of populist bent. I think it was very clear, to that the president's vision to sort of rejuvenate and renew the manufacturing, the industrial sector. I mean, you saw it with the choice of choosing JD Vance. It's all in on, I think it was the blue curtain, they called it, or the blue wall, or whatever it was, to win back those states. And that is resonating with people, to see America build and grow and succeed here. There's different means of doing that don't fit into those comfortable buckets, that we always think from a sort of maybe a pure, I don't know if orthodox is the right word, but a pure, pure lowercase L liberalism. So again, for the viewer, I hope it's just an interesting conversation to think about these things that are out there that are happening. Are sovereign wealth funds good ideas? Are taking stakes in companies good ideas? Is it a short term? Is it a long term thing? The goal of it is doing things differently than it's been done, because the way that it's been done has gotten us into $37 trillion of debt. You spread all that out per capita. It's something that we feel like we could never pay off, but thinking of these things in innovative ways. Strategic Bitcoin reserves. That's people, 2 years ago would have thought that was the kookiest thing you could have ever come up with. And so the president, he has a bold vision. These are things that are different, but not novel. As we've discussed, these things have been tried before. They've been done before to varying degrees of success. So we'll see what the future holds. And I think the big thing too, the big takeaway for me is every day I wake up and I wonder how I'm surprised by things. And every day I wake up, something surprises me. So
Yeah.
buckle up. It's a wild ride in the Trump administration.
Yeah. Well, he's shifting, I think the view of like Republicans and Democrats, it used to be like in the 90s and 2000s, Republicans were just free market capitalism, free trade, and just, kind of not a concern with engineering the economy to help any particular class of the economy. It generally ended up, we saw kind of more yawning gaps between the rich and poor. Democrats' proposed solutions were more of like socialism and top-down government control. The free market capitalists are just total free market. Now you have this Trumpian model of like, cobbling together ideas that have been floated in different contexts, and he's kind of using them as ingredients in a pot to kind of remodel the economy away from an importer economy, creating more of an exporter economy, moving away from an income tax view of the world to more of a tariff or a tax on kind of consumption, or having American taxpayers and everyday people kind of share in prosperity, but while still encouraging more rapid growth that we used to see more commonly. So really an interesting, innovative elixir of an economic model that they're building. And Scott Besson talks about like the tax cut, reducing a reliance on income taxes, tariffs increasing our reliance on kind of business taxes, particularly foreign businesses, and then trade deals that are going to advantage American manufacturing and workers. And then you add these other ingredients into the mix. I think it's an interesting future. Kind of, I share what you said about just always kind of being surprised, because he does come out with ideas that no other politician would come out with on a pretty regular basis. And since things, America has grown faster than anybody else, it's been doing better than anybody else, but we could do better than we are doing. We do have a debt crisis. We do have a Social Security bankruptcy crisis. We have lost way too many blue collar and middle class jobs. So these are all things that we need to improve upon. He's throwing darts. He's figuring out what he can do to improve on these things, and we will see how history judges him. I feel like these are all things we're trying, and we'll see if they work. Like you said, they've had varying degrees of success in other contexts. So TBD, I guess. We'll see what happens.
And one of the things too about the president that, I don't know why it surprises me, but it does surprise me is, he jokes, so often about, winning, we're going to win everything. Everyone's going to be tired of winning. But it's amazing that, what the bully pulpit of the presidency, particularly under this president, can do and how quickly things can change. And you wake up, again, and you're like, we have a 15% revenue sharing deal with the largest company in the world. It's a different way of doing things. They've talked about, I think maybe even JD Vance has talked about this. I don't know the exact phraseology, but essentially rebates for the American people for the wealth that tariffs generate. And then there's the sort of, well, are these companies going to be paying the tariffs, or is it passed through the consumer? It's a lot of things. And so we'll keep following it here. And again, the goal of this type of segment, for the viewer, for the listener, is let's expose you to what is happening and help you, understand what people are thinking about. And you can, hopefully come to a good conclusion, for yourself. Maybe you love it. Maybe, maybe you want to move to Alaska now and get the $1,700 per person dividend from oil. We'll see. Lots of interesting stuff there. Well, we'll transition over to our next segment, and this is an interesting one. So fresh off the success of political operations like things like the Bitcoin Voter Project, Fair Shake, and Stand with Crypto, the Wall Street Journal had an exclusive report this week that Silicon Valley is now ready to spend big on AI. And they're spending big on AI, but here they're going to put over $100 million into Leading the Future, which is a network of pro-AI policy PACs and political organizations. So, Brian, I know you've been intimately involved in this angle from the Bitcoin space, but what are your thoughts on this effort and its impact that it could have on the 2026 elections and beyond?
Well, the AI industry, look, some of the AI evangelists, look at Joe Lonsdale or Mark Andreessen or David Sachs, for that matter, people who really view AI. I've talked about how Bitcoin is, returning to sound money principles for the digital age. AI is really about the delivery of information. So we have the evolution of money in the financial system, and we have the evolution of how people are going to consume information. And AI and the digital asset space, I think, are two industries that are going to be the next boom of growth for the country. People talk about the Magnificent Seven and how important they've been for growth, because when you take them out of the S&P 500, the remaining 493 just have not grown nearly at the rate that the Mag 7 has. Now I think we're looking at Bitcoin, digital assets, and AI being the next phase of how, sure, the Mag 7 participates in a lot of innovation, but it's these areas, these policy areas, these areas of innovation that are going to drive the next phase of growth for the US and really the world. And will the US lead or not? Well, so far, what we've seen is kind of a patchwork of laws across the country. The 50 states are trying to get their arms around it, and it seems to be kind of hampering growth in these businesses. Compliance costs are rising. They're having to spend more on navigating legal frameworks than they would like to, taking resources away from actually developing the tech and innovating. So we look at the 2024 election. The Bitcoin Voter Project alone, we estimate that we turned out enough voters for pro-Bitcoin, pro-innovation Senator Dave McCormick, enough votes to put him over the top in that race. We turned out tens of thousands of voters for Ted Cruz in his race in Texas. We turned out many, many voters across swing states for President Trump after he embraced Bitcoin and digital assets. And CNN reported that crypto voters, there were enough crypto voters in swing states to really swing the election for Trump. The people who are now developing AI and are concerned that they're going to have legal, political, regulatory barriers to their growth looked at the success of the digital asset industry and they said, we're going to do the same thing. So much so that they hired the same people who ran Stand with Crypto and Fair Shake. It's even the same spokesperson. So they're really literally taking a page out of the playbook because they're hiring all the same people to say, do what you did for crypto, but do it now for AI. So that's what's happening. $100 million is a nice round number that will get big headlines and show candidates all around the country that they have heft and that they're going to be able to talk directly to voters and get, help voters understand why these things matter and why their policymakers should be helping foster the growth of this industry. So we have seen, it looks like Andreessen Horowitz, also a big player in the crypto super PACs, going to be a big player in the AI super PACs. OpenAI president Greg Brockman, I think, said they are going to be involved in this. I know Joe Lonsdale Palantir co-founder fame, also has lots of different businesses. So he's going to be involved in this. The hottest topic on this subject in Washington has been whether the federal government should create a federal framework, or should we allow, take a more states' rights approach and allow the laboratories of democracy. When it comes to tech like this that is global in nature, people all over the world can use it. I think this kind of the states' rights approach can create issues, because if you're having to mold your business to fit the most restrictive state, then that really can kind of hamper growth. So having a debate at the federal level, looking what different states have done, taking kind of the best ingredients and having one consistent set of rules is probably, for the nature of this technology, probably going to be the better approach. So that the federal preemption argument, I think I do see why that makes sense. So they're going to be pushing for that. It looks like they're going to start in New York, California, Illinois, and Ohio, support bipartisan candidate. Any candidate who supports their issues, they will help them out. I believe New York and California have taken pretty restrictive approaches. I think the industry has not been happy with the legislative activity, particularly in California. Illinois has been passing, I think, some or proposing or passing some pretty restrictive rules. Ohio, I'm not as familiar with about what they're doing there. It's a big state in presidential years, of course. There's a governor's race this year, statewide race. Could be some reasons why they want to play in Ohio. So starting there, that's a lot of money to just play in 4 states. So they're going to have a big impact. And then I presume would want to then build on that for the 2028 race and take probably more of a national approach. Well, they'll see what works, what doesn't, take the lessons learned, and then presumably expand beyond these particular states that they're going to get started in. So anyway, that's stream of consciousness, but that's all the background information that I have in my brain that I just dumped on you. I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
No, I think it's a testament to how successful the Bitcoin, in particular, the Bitcoin advocacy sphere has been, where they're literally just taking not only, they're taking the structure, they're taking the frame, the boards, the nails, the screws, the sheetrock, the shingles, they're taking everything and the people who built it with them. So the success, as a tortured metaphor to say, the success of the Bitcoin approach, I think is evident in applying it not only to the AI sphere, but with that significant of investment. I think it will have an impact. And I think you're spot on. I think the big issues are going to be preemption. I always think back to, I think the easiest way that you kind of put you can help people understand the preemption, which is the federal government setting a standard, not letting the states do it. 2 examples that I'm going to think of, a lot of people think of like emission standards with cars. If California, it's usually the state that does it, I'm not picking on California, but I am, because they're the one that usually does it. You set a emission standard, and then you realize, you sell whatever 20% of the cars in the country in California, the manufacturers are like, okay, well, maybe we should just make all our cars like this, because we don't want to make 20% of our cars for California and 80% of it for elsewhere. And then for me, the example that always resonated is when I worked in Congress, my boss always had a bill. They called it PICA, Protect Interstate Commerce Act. And it was response to California setting the standard for the size of chicken cages. And so you think about your eggs, and free range is a big thing. Well, before free range was a big thing, it was you have to have a certain size of chicken coop. And so instead of it being 2 feet by 2 feet, California said it had to be 6 by 6 or whatever it was. And there's some interstate commerce components there. So taking the Bitcoin approach, looking at it at the state and federal level, and realizing how bipartisan this is. Or in the Bitcoin space, a lot of people always want to say nonpartisan, but I think that is that those are all the ingredients for success. You use the term elixir in the last segment. They're mixing up all the right ingredients to be successful, and realizing from a public policy perspective, from an economic perspective, and just from a societal perspective, that AI is the next stage where we're going to see massive growth, massive disruption, positive disruption in the economy. And so getting ahead of it on the public policy side of things now is getting ahead of it on the political side. To be ahead of it on the public policy side, I think is great. So good for these folks. And then also there were a headline recently that the Winklevoss twins are going to pump in another $21 million, a significant number in the Bitcoin community to Bitcoin efforts. So a lot of money being spent, the goal being good public policy, and we'll continue to cover it here on the podcast. For our I don't even know if I can call this our final substantive segment, but this was just such a fun, and it was a very popular segment last week. So we covered the drama at Cracker Barrel, and it reminds me so much, like, growing up, you grew up in a town with like 3 radio stations. You hear Rush Limbaugh would always talk about people getting into a fight at, Burger King or McDonald's over McNuggets and stuff. But it has just been quite a week covering Cracker Barrel, and Cracker Barrel, this is my goofy joke of the day. They thought they were pointing a double barrel, but they ended up cracking like 2 eggs and an old timer's breakfast. So Brian, what is the latest on the Cracker Barrel saga?
Okay, so we go backwards about a week. The CEO of Cracker Barrel goes on Good Morning America, talks about the redesign of the restaurants and the logo. People didn't like it, to say the least. There was a popular revolt against it. They thought the new redesign, making it lighter and more modern, took away from the character of Cracker Barrel, and changing the logo, removing the old timer and his barrel and the shape of the logo, and making it just a sterile yellow background, black font saying Cracker Barrel, taking away from the character of the restaurant, not speaking to their core audience. So there was an online revolt. And then but the company kind of doubled down. They said in the last few days have shown us anything, it's how deeply people care about Cracker Barrel. We're truly grateful for your heartfelt voices. What has not changed and what will never change are the values the company was built on. Paraphrasing, first opened in 1969, values hard work, family, and scratch-cooked food made with care. Of course, some employees have come out and kind of shot a hole through that everything is made from scratch. I don't think it actually is. But anyway, so the revolt about how they were making it soulless, wokeifying it, whatever you want to call it, it was loud, it was persistent. The stock price started to reflect it. Now, for the viewer's context, so over the last 4 years or so, the stock price has fallen precipitously. It went from like $175 a share down to 50-something dollars a share. So that's why they were trying to make changes, because they're like, we can't sustain this. We have to change something and get more customers. So their idea was met with quite a lot of hostility, because as we said last week, I think when you have a restaurant serving a core demographic, you got to double down on the nostalgia, the Americana, the things that make people want to go to Cracker Barrel in the first place. You refresh those things. You don't just change the identity of the company, in my humble opinion. So anyway, they kind of doubled down on their rebrand, not really listening or responding to the customers. August 20th, stock price is $59. August 21st falls to $50. So it loses, 10% or whatever of their market cap. Recovers over the course of that day up to $54. So it's still down, but not down as much. We get to August 26th, it's around $56 a share. Obviously, way down from where it was 4 years ago. Still a little down from when they announced the rebrand. Then the president, always having his finger on the pulse of those who are online, decides he's going to weigh in on the side of the people. And he says he encourages them to go back to their old logo. And he says they got $1 billion of free publicity if they play their cards right. It's tricky to do, but it can be a great opportunity. Make Cracker Barrel a winner again. So he tells them, go back to the old logo. He does it. gets a lot of traction. People are very happy with his statement. Cracker Barrel listens to the president, calls the White House, called one of the deputy chiefs of staff, Taylor Budowich, a friend of mine, and they said they heard the president. They're going to go back to the old logo. So the Cracker Barrel cracked. And they decided to scrap the rebranding campaign. That tweet, that announcement, 22 million views. People are very happy that they listened to the people. They're going back to their old branding. And by Wednesday morning, so that was Tuesday night, they announced abandoning the rebrand, going back to the old Cracker Barrel. Wednesday morning, stock is up 7.8%, up over $60 a share to $62 a share. So seems like I think just the old kind of adage of like, listen to your customers, respond to your customers, especially if you're a brand like Cracker Barrel that represents nostalgia. It's the old country store. It represents Americana. You have to listen to your audience because your audience makes you successful or not if they abandon you. So it took a little cajoling, but management finally came around to what the people wanted at the urging of the President of the United States, talking about Cracker Barrel. Didn't see that one coming, but you live, you learn, you wake up surprised. As we said earlier, good outcome, I think, for all. Hopefully Cracker Barrel will thrive once again. We'll see. There's a pretty good Babylon Bee article on this where they said, is Cracker Barrel going too far? And they showed the logos, the logo with a Confederate flag behind it, changing the motto to "The South will rise again." So one of my favorite, there are a lot of really good memes that came out of this controversy. I thought the Babylon Bee hit it on the head in terms of satire. Thought that was hilarious. But anyway, all's well that ends well. I think, I'm more inclined to go to Cracker Barrel now that they restored the greatness of Cracker Barrel. They made Cracker Barrel great again.
They did, and they're going to win again. And you hate to be cynical about this sort of stuff, but you wonder if, there was a pretty public push for the CEO to be removed, and you wonder if the CEO is like, the only way I'm going to save my job is before President Trump comes out and says, it's my turn to go. But it is interesting, that point you said about, listening to your audience. I'm a big pro wrestling fan, and it's John Cena's final year. He's retiring at the end of the year. And so he's kind of doing this farewell tour. And they did a thing where he became a bad guy and now he's a good guy again. But I think the point that he always, drills in on is it's the audience. It's what does the audience want? What does the audience want to see? And so WWE, they ended up either not renewing the contract of this 53-year-old guy that was kind of like a comedy bit for them. They didn't renew his contract. They let him go. The people went ballistic, and they bring this guy back. And I occasionally watch America's Got Talent with my daughter, and like Simon Cowell, the most stereotypical curmudgeon that there is in, sort of reality show competition television. Half the time he'll watch an act and he'll say he may not really think it's that good, but he stands up and turns around, looks at the audience, and he says, look, it doesn't really matter what I think. It matters what the people think. So much like you said, Cracker Barrel, things have been sliding a little bit, but for whatever reason, it's also the other thing that makes me smile is you think back to the CEO, that tech CEO, and his HR, employee, they were hugging at the Coldplay concert, and everybody just dumped on them, and now everybody was dumping on Cracker Barrel. It's kind of like, you hate to see that it's like we're dumping on people and stuff to bring us all together, but it shows that, there is just something, there's this just desire, this social need to feel connected and on the same page about something when the world's so divisive. So thank you to Cracker Barrel for bringing America together again. A great segment. And I hope we talk about Cracker Barrel every week for the rest of we're going to change this name of the podcast to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod and the Cracker Barrel Update Pod. We'll do a spinoff, but we've had a great episode, and we'll end with our final segment in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And so next week is the kickoff to the 2025 NFL season. The first game of the year is the Cowboys versus the Eagles on Thursday Night Football. And as a lifelong Cowboys fan, not just because I live in Texas, I've been a Cowboys fan since the last time they were good, which was 30 years ago. But as a Cowboys fan, it pains me to say that the Eagles are the defending Super Bowl champions. And as a Cowboys fan, it pains me to say that I think we're in for another tough season with the Eagles and the Commanders looking like they'll have strong seasons again. But what I do want to say is there's a new documentary on Jerry Jones and the Cowboys that just came out on Netflix, and it was extraordinary. It was very well produced. There were great interviews, and it showed, for better or worse, depending on your perspective, that Jerry Jones may have changed the game of football more than anyone else in the history of football. He went from, it was a league where it was, octogenarian billionaires that owned teams, and they had revenue sharing of jerseys and gate receipts and all this sort of stuff. And he said, yeah, forget that. I'm going to brand this team. And so when they were only selling Coke in every stadium in the country, he said, we're selling Pepsi. And when everyone wore Reebok, he said, we're going to wear Nike. And the league sued him for $300 million. And he countersued them on a sort of an antitrust monopoly theory for $700 million. And it was a really interesting clip. We, of course, for being a family friendly show, can't use all the colorful language that he used, but he said, you win this lawsuit and you're going to take my team. And I get that. I win this lawsuit, and believe me, I'm coming to collect every penny from you. So anyways, just super interesting documentary. And even though it doesn't look like the Cowboys are going to win a Super Bowl this year, you can go back and relive the glory days of my childhood on that great Netflix documentary.
Very cool. And as a Giants fan, it pains me to see things about the Cowboys or the Eagles winning. But yeah, long-suffering Giants fan. Although we did have the 2 Eli Super Bowls. I grew up with the Phil Simms and Jeff Hostetler Giants winning the Super Bowl in 86 and 90. And then the Eli Super Bowls beating the Patriots was amazing. So I can't complain too much. But good to know we're an NFC East podcast. There's another spinoff for you. So my grab bag is the Terminal List. I've talked about this before. The Terminal List on Amazon was one of my favorite shows in the last several years. I have read all the Jack Carr novels with the James Reese series. They turned it into the first series of the Terminal List. James Reese played by Chris Pratt. They are back with the new season. It's called Terminal List Dark Wolf. It is an origin story. Taylor Kitsch is back, and it is talking about earlier parts of his career as a Navy SEAL. I watched the first episode. It's amazing. It is the best show on television. My only critique is watching it before bed makes it really hard to sleep. And reading those books before bed makes it hard to sleep because it's about Navy SEALs fighting wars, not just against enemies, but like emotional and intellectual wars with their superiors and policymakers and how we should be deploying our warfighters. It is fascinating. It's entertaining. It's, historical fiction, recent historical fiction, I guess I would call it. We're talking about like the Iraq War and stuff like that. If you are looking for a new show, Terminal List Dark Wolf, just through the first episode, it's amazing. And it is equaling or surpassing the first Terminal List series that I watched on Amazon. So good job. Congratulations to Jack Carr, to Chris Pratt, to Taylor Kitsch. They have another hit on their hands, and I will be watching every episode. Check it out. It's awesome. So I think that is it for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Like and subscribe. Get the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Send us your comments, your questions. We will be happy to engage with you. And we'll see you next time for another episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.